Hello, everybody. Greetings. Welcome in. It is Monday, August 23rd. It is the first day we are really going to talk this year's fantasy football season. I'm, of course, Flying Ryan Gilchrist, along with
Tampa Motormouth, Joel Verlin.
All right. And before we really dive in, we're going to give you another breakdown of what we're doing this week. Today, we are going to do wide receiver and tight ends with general draft strategy, some sleepers, some bust. I've got some do not draft players for both positions. We'll do the same thing tomorrow for quarterbacks and running backs. Again, general draft strategy, bust, sleepers, do not drafts, avoids, all those. Wednesday, we're just going to talk regular strategy.
What about kernel draft strategy?
We're not that advanced yet. So Wednesday, we're going to talk overall draft strategy, kind of some things we like, some things we don't like, some strategies that have worked for us in the past, and some that we don't recommend. Thursday, we are going to do a mock draft or a live draft, depending on how my work league decides they want to do their draft night. We'll do either one or two sleepers on air that are mock drafts. They go by pretty quick, or the live draft where Joel will be basically criticizing all of my picks the whole way. And Friday, live from Massachusetts, doing our live draft behind us. On Sunday, we'll be live podcasting both our Sports Shuffle Fans 10-team league and our League of Winning draft on Friday night. Times are below, so we'll be on right around 6:30.
When you say Massachusetts, did you ever remember there was a company called Jib Jab, and they came out with funny political songs, and one of them, the character was going Massachusetts, and they were making fun of how you say this. I don't know why that popped in my brain.
I'm very fortunate the people I go and see do not have very heavy New England accents, because that would drive me absolutely insane. But we will be live podcasting that in Massachusetts. We may or may not have someone else able to commentate. I do not know. It'll just kind of depend on how that night goes. But again, that is just the overall theme for this week, what our plans are. And we should be on right around 6:30 every day for the next 3-4. And then Friday, of course, before the drafts, about 5 minutes before those start at 6:30.
Because I tend to do better when I eat stuff.
Yeah, that tends to help, especially since at work I don't typically eat a lunch. I just kind of suffer and then get home and then gorge. Anyways, before we go too far off
you
the
then
rails,
have 2 meals at once to make up for not having the aforementioned meal.
It's a meal and a half, and then I go to bed a little hungry. It's weird. Anyways, before we go too far off the rails, we are going to jump in.
When do we ever stay on the rails?
No. Hey, I understand. But we're going to do it right today.
Our core role, the core value of the Sports Shuffle is to never stay on the rails. That's in our mission statement.
I'm pretty sure the tagline is still all crazy all the time. And I think we typically live up to that. But we are going to start with our wide receivers, our general draft strategy at the position. So, Joel, tell me what you typically think of at wide receiver.
I'm going to tend to go with the 10-team league, just because I know you have people out there that prefer 14-team leagues, the incredibly psychotic 16-team leagues, maybe even more that I've seen. Yes, they're out there, but I think by and large, the average player, when you hop on the internet, I want to do fantasy football,
10 or 12.
You wind up in a 10-team league. That just for some reason tends to be the general default. And after the obvious pick, because I know people out there I know are like, do something wild, doing something crazy. If, let's say, you pick first after you do the obligatory CMC, you have out there, of course, you have because I know we're talking WRs and TEs.
I was wondering where you're going when you started with CMC, honestly.
But that's because it's the first pick. I mean, anyone who has the first pick, if you
it's
don't
either him or Cook,
get that.
Yeah.
But then rounds 2 and 3, it's like, okay. So we'll put aside the RBs for right now, since I think we're on WRs, unless I miss my guess. You can talk about Calvin Ridley, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, although you do have to call into question with the recent A.J. Brown injury news, and I'm going to do a Sports Shuffle audible on that. Do you downgrade A.J. Brown, or how much of an ADP hit does he take because of the recent injury news?
I don't think it's going to be severe. He's still expected to be ready for the start of the season. It's just coming back from his surgery on the offseason. I don't think it's going to be a problem. If you're going to downgrade him, I don't think you downgrade him even a full round. He's right now somewhere around ADP 23, wide receiver 7. Maybe he drops 8 to 10 spots at most, 3 or so wide receivers down the board, but I still think he's going to be the number 1 in the Tennessee Titans system. Of course, they did trade for Julio Jones, who's going to be a big addition. I don't know if I believe in him. We'll get to that later. But I don't think you downgrade A.J. Brown too much. He's going to be solid. He's still, I think, the number 1 option on that team as a pass catcher. Obviously, Derrick Henry is going to get the lion's share of the work, back-to-back leading the league in rushing and over 2,000 yards last year.
And on the tail end of that group, you also have Keenan Allen. So out of those 4, also given with the insight that you just did with A.J. Brown, who do you find yourself, do you lean Ridley? Do you go Jefferson?
I would say you either look Calvin Ridley or Keenan Allen. A.J. Brown does have Julio in a very heavy running game with Derrick Henry. Justin Jefferson has kind of a similar situation with Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook. They are going to take some of the time that the ball could go to Justin Jefferson and go somewhere else. Calvin Ridley really doesn't have that competition. No running game of note to speak of. Mike Davis, I'm sorry, I'm not believing that is the number 1 guy who's going to, carry the rock the entire season. Gage is your number 2 wide receiver. You've got Hooper and Pitts. Tight ends we'll get into a little bit, but rookies don't tend to flourish right away. Pitts may be an extreme case of awesome, but I think Calvin Ridley's got the role pretty much to himself. And Keenan Allen, kind of the same way. I do like the tight end situation with the Chargers as well, but Mike Williams is the number 2. After that, it's random nobodies off the side of the street, and Mike Williams tends to get hurt. So Keenan Allen in a team that I think is going to pass a lot, and Calvin Ridley, another team that's going to pass a lot. 2 other factors in there. Hey, the volume is going to be there. Ryan and Herbert are going to throw the ball a ton, and that's going to help. So if I had to pick, I'd rather take Keenan Allen because he's a few picks lower right now, ADP at 29, where Ridley's around 20. Just give me that little extra value with Keenan Allen, but you can't go wrong with either one of them.
Okay, now going to rounds 4 and 5 with wide receivers. You might find Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, and then 2 Buccaneer options, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So out of those toss-ups,
I would love to have Mike Evans in the 4th round. If you give me Mike Evans in the 4th or 5th round, that is fantastic. He is a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. He may finish top 10, if not better, in the wide receiver position very easily. He's right now going off as wide receiver 11, somewhere around that 3rd, 4th round split. I would take Mike Evans of those very, very easily. If the way I like to draft is I wait for the value at wide receiver. They dry up early at running back. Wide receiver has a lot of depth, so I don't like overpaying. I don't like leaving a weakness at running back early, so I'll wait till that depth starts, and that's usually round 4, round 5, round 6. And I'm comfortable with Mike Evans as my number 1 wide receiver, and then coming back and trying to get like a CeeDee Lamb, an Adam Thielen, a Robert Woods, something in that range, even Allen Robinson, Terry McLaurin if he falls a little bit, as my number 2. And then I feel really good because I know I've got 2 or 3 great players, running back or tight end even, before that. So I feel like I've got a good start to the draft if I have Evans in the 4th and then any one of those wide receivers in the 5th.
All right, now we're going to round 6 and 7, and we're not quite into dartboard territory, kids, yet, but we're talking Robbie Anderson, T. Higgins, Jerry Jeudy, and Chase Claypool. How the mighty have fallen. Out of that group, who are you liking?
I like Claypool and Robbie Anderson. They will come up later as well. I'm comfortable with either one of those even if they're my number 2. So if you wait a little bit longer, maybe you get that quarterback early. You have a little bit of advantage there. You did take a tight end early. I think if you get Claypool and Robbie Anderson, you have the potential to still have a solid, very solid wide receiver core. If you took a Mike Evans in like around 3 or around 4, you could have a very, very solid team taking those guys late.
All right, now we're going to get into a little bit more high-risk category with rounds 8 and 9. Still talking a 10-team league, just sort of using that as the gauge in what we're drafting here. How about these choices now? Now, not as you're sort of kind of going, yeah, boy, Tyler Boyd, Cortland Sutton, who especially after the injury risk last year, Brandon Cooks, and here's another case of how the mighty have fallen, Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, depending on where you're drafting, the ADP on these guys will vary. Cortland Sutton right now somewhere around 82. Tyler Boyd 87. Juju is at 78. And I don't remember who the other one was, but it was also a little later there. I don't love any of them. Give me, if I'm going to take a flyer, give me Tyler Boyd. I think he's got the most. I know he's got the most experience on that Cincinnati receiving core. Higgins is in his second year. Chase in his first. It's going to take them time to get their footing. I don't love any of these people. The ones in this range that I do like, really nothing spectacular. Maybe if Antonio Brown is there, because I do think that passing game for the Bucs can sustain 2 or 3 solid options. But he might even be going a little bit later. So I don't think this is a good place for value in the 8th and 9th round.
And the value, it gets even crazier. Rounds 10 to 11, we're talking. Hopefully, I'm saying the name right. Laviska Shenault.
Yeah, Laviska Shenault.
Jarvis Landry, extra bonus points for me. Woohoo! Jarvis Landry, Michael Gallup, and Michael Pittman.
At this point, you're taking upside guys. So I don't want Landry. Landry is an older player. You know what you're getting. Someone like a Shenault, someone like a Pittman, you really have that upside, especially if Carson Wentz comes back for the Colts. I like Pittman a lot. I don't know if this is going to be his breakout year. If Wentz is healthy the whole way, it very well could be. Right now going off around wide receiver 45, pick 114. If he pops off, he's probably the number 1 receiver in that offense, and he has a shot of being a wide receiver too, which would be top 20 in a 10 and a top 24 in a 12-team league, and you're getting him in a later round. So that's a good pick for somebody to take there. Just depends on really your needs at that point.
Okay, and now we have arrived at dartboard territory, kids. Rounds 12 to 13. Darnell Mooney, Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, Marvin Jones, or Jalen Waddle. Names that you're sort of thinking, I have no idea who these freaking guys are, like the quote from Major League.
Yeah, Darnell Mooney's the most interesting. He's probably the number 2 wide receiver on that team right now. Depending on when Justin Fields takes over. He will take over at some point, but it definitely will not be week number 1, says the worst coach in football, Matt Nagy. I'm never going to let that go. He's terrible. He really is. And I have my thoughts. But Darnell Mooney, I think, realistically could be not a threat to break your starting lineup, but he could be a flex option on certain weeks, especially once Justin Fields gets into the fray. At this point, you're really looking for upside guys, maybe even like a Russell Gage in Atlanta, somebody who's got some opportunity. Elijah Moore, Rashad Bateman, some of your rookies. And I know this is even later, but don't sleep on Sterling Shepard. I know Golladay went to the Giants, but Sterling Shepard seems to be the favorite target of Daniel Jones. He is going number 62 wide receiver overall at this time. ADP of 180. He is a free pick. He can be your last pick before you get kickers and defense if your team or if your league still does that. He's got upside, but he's very, very late.
And can I toss out my 3 sleepers as far as wide receivers go?
Yeah, let's go to sleepers now for wide receivers.
Darius Slayton, despite his ADP slide, I think his potential upside should still be on everyone's fantasy radar. Yeah. Sleeper 1. Sleeper 2, a name that definitely going to remember if you're a Packers fan or a fantasy football fan, Marquise Valdes-Scantling. Say that 3 times real fast. No more, of course, than a late round dart throw in a fantasy league. But hey, when you're talking about he had 4 games with at least 19 fantasy point and 5 games with 19 or fewer yards, that's got to be worth at least a look or 2 or 3. And a name definitely familiar to fantasy players last year as my third sleeper, Brashard Perryman. Tempting target because of his speed. I feel the need for speed, but we might want to let somebody else be tempted by him because given the uncertainty in Detroit.
Yeah, when it comes to pass catchers in Detroit, it's hard to really get on board. I do like the Darius Slayton call for the same exact reason as Sterling Shepard. He's got a good report. He's produced in that offense already. For me, I didn't go quite as deep on the sleepers, but for me, a sleeper is someone you pick late that can grotesquely beat their ADP. So we'll start with Marquise Hollywood Brown. He's right now wide receiver 43 with an ADP of 110. He's not super exciting, but the last 8 weeks of the season, he was a top 15 wide receiver. That was when Lamar Jackson got back from his COVID time, and he was playing a lot better. If Lamar Jackson returns to that form, I think he could very easily retain that top 15 status.
Game.
Yes. That could be his top 15 status right there. Next one, actually next two, I said I was really high on Claypool and Robbie Anderson. I'm very high on both of them. They're both on my sleeper list. Right now, Claypool is wide receiver 27 with an ADP of 72. He has legitimate top 10 potential. I do agree that Juju is going to have a rough season. Claypool is going to take over that number one. We've seen him make some spectacular catches already in his career and some big games. I think he's got that big upside. And then for me, the other sleeper I have is Robbie Anderson. We mentioned it already. He's going at wide receiver 35. He will be the number one wide receiver on that team. I think the connection with Sam Darnold is going to come into play. It's going to be a big advantage for him. ADP of 85. He could be your number 2 wide receiver when it's all said and done. I think he'll be a top 24 guy at the end of the year, and you're getting a pretty good value on him there. Not deep sleepers like Joel did, but if you're looking for depth that can legitimately be in your starting lineup, I think those are 3 realistic options. So next we'll go to our busts. Joel, who do you got as your busts?
The name definitely familiar to all of us last year. Will Fuller. Leg injury. He's coming off of that suspension. New team with some chemistry. It's easy for me to say. To generate. Plus, will he click with Tua?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. There's a lot of good weapons there, though. So he's got the potential to be open to Alexa a lot better this offseason. In the preseason so far, he's been pretty impressive. It's going to be tough with him not having as much time. He's going to miss the first game with the suspension, and he is very injury prone. So I can see him being a bust. He is going a little later in drafts right now, wide receiver 41. He's got upside, but he's also got that critical injury bust potential.
My number 2 is not going to shock you one iota. Number 2, DJ Chark. Yeah. Too many mouths to feed. If you draft him, expect more disappointment than upside. Might be okay for some fill-in emergencies, but other than that, I wouldn't depend too much on him as you just remember how much disappointment because he had some flashes of brilliance last year, but so much more disappointment than the brilliance.
DJ Chark, again, another one of those guys, has a lot of upside potential. Depends on his chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. If he's the starter, because I guess they don't want to say he is yet. Right now, going at 79 overall, wide receiver 32. All of these numbers I'm pulling are from Fantasy Pros, by the way. If you go to a different site, it may be slightly different. But that being said, I don't think it's something you want to hang your hat on. It's someone, if you can get him later, 9th, 10th round, as a flyer, absolutely. But in what would be either the 7th or 8th round, depending on your league size, I think that's a little rich for DJ Chark. Any more busts for you?
Yep, number 3, definite, not one you would call deep. And I don't think there are too many people who are going to be surprised that I'm pulling out Odell Beckham as a Buster Rooney because certainly going to have some games where he's going to be boom shakalaka territory, but the Browns offense should improve this year, but you have a lack of a target volume will put a ceiling on his value, and fantasy managers right now are drafting him as a borderline wide receiver 2.
Right now, he is projected at 71st overall, 28, wide receiver 28 off the board. Not terrible value, but Jarvis Landry is there. Austin Hooper is there. You have the two-headed monster in the backfield with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And, of course, Baker Mayfield's your quarterback. He's not spectacular by any means, so I do think he's a risk. He's coming off a knee injury. That's not healthy quite yet, I wouldn't think. Only 11 or so months.
Especially in the way that Odell carries himself as if he were in the WWE, not the NFL.
Yeah, we're waiting to see if his abusive relationship with the kicking net resumes now that he's healthy. Only time will tell. All right, for my sleeper or my bust, I went a little more top heavy. These are guys that are being drafted fairly high that have a good chance of not living up to that expectation. So for me, I'm going to start kind of off of where I finished with sleepers. I said Robbie Anderson was a sleeper. I think he could be a top 20 guy. Right now, DJ Moore is going at wide receiver 20. I think he is going to be by far the number 2 option in the passing game for wide receivers. Not to mention Christian McCaffrey being full healthy could take a lot of his volume away. So I think DJ Moore is going to bust. I think he's probably going to be like closer to wide receiver 40 when it's all said and done. I just don't see him being a top 20 guy. Next is Julio Jones. He's had some injury problems. He plays every week, but it doesn't always show up when he plays, when he's injured. It is a run-heavy team, and I think A.J. Brown is still the number 1 there. Jones right now going number 14 at wide receiver and 40 overall. And the last one I've got is Amari Cooper. It's hard to put any Cowboy on this list because I think that offense is set to explode if Dak comes back. It seems like he's healthy. There's a lot of smoke around him right now, but he's going wide receiver 18. He is ADP of 46. He's got to contend with Zeke, who looks to be rebounding. He's still got CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup on the other wide receiver positions that are going to take some of his carries. And he has a very bad habit of vanishing. He might have a week where he's going to go for 40 points, and then the next 2 weeks he'll go for a combined 6. I just don't trust him. I think CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup are going to be better options in the passing game overall. And I just think Amari Cooper is going to get lost. He's someone who might actually get traded if someone's foolish enough to take that contract. And then I know you didn't do any of these. This is something I kind of thought of last minute. My do not draft and avoids. Michael Thomas, I think goes without saying right now with the last year and a half, the drama, the crybaby mentality, the injuries. He's just someone you want to avoid. Right now, he's going somewhere in that 6 to 8 round range. Wide receiver 3, he's wide receiver 26 off the board. I just don't trust him. I don't want any part of that Saints offense if it's not named Alvin Kamara. And even then, I'm a little sketchy depending on who that quarterback ends up being. The other one I don't want any part of is Kenny Golladay. He's been broken for about 4 years straight now. Going to a possibly worse quarterback than he had, for sure. I just don't know if he's going to be great in New York. And my last one is Deebo Samuel. Just he is very injury prone. And we don't know who the quarterback is quite going to be yet. Trey Lance seems inconsistent, but Jimmy Garoppolo is not a great player. It is a run-heavy team, and Brandon Ayuk seems to be the guy emerging as the number 1 there. So those are 3 guys I don't want any part of. If they fall to me in the right spot, everybody's draftable at the right price, but those 3 would have to fall quite a bit for me.
I'll toss out one, definitely Juju Smith-Schuster with how he has fallen and just the uncertainty following him this year. It just does not look good. And you just remember how his numbers faded, and I mean faded towards the end of last year. Just I would definitely 12-foot pole, not a 10-foot pole. 12-foot pole would stay away from Juju this year.
Yeah, and for me at wide receiver, my general strategy is don't overpay. You'll see people take Devontae Adams at 5 overall. You'll see people take Tyreek Hill really, really high. Even Stephon Diggs. They're great players. They're going to put up good numbers, but you run out of running backs. You run out of the elite tight ends very quickly when you can get somebody very good in the 4th or 5th round. So don't overpay. There's a ton of depth at the position. I think the value starts somewhere around end of round 4, early round 5. You want to draft at least 5, if not 6. Some of those can be in the later rounds. Take your Flyers, take your Elijah Moores, and hope for the best. And breakouts are very common. Remember, Justin Jefferson went undrafted for the most part last season, and he ended up being a top top wide receiver. So you can always find somebody on the waivers at the wide receiver position where you can't necessarily find a breakout at tight end or running back as easily. So now we'll go over to the tight end side of things. And just to go over my general draft strategy with here is don't take them above ADP. I am not a fan of taking Kelce in the first round. I think you're leaving way too much value on the board for a 31, 32-year-old tight end who at some point is going to have to decline in theory. We've been saying that about Brady for about 15 years, so maybe not, but you got to think at some point the people like Kelce and Kittle are going to start to regress a little bit. If you don't take one of the top three, which would be Kittle, Waller, and Kelce, for lack of a better term, you can punt on the position and just wait. There's not a huge difference between tight end 4 and tight end 16, in my opinion. Yes, there are some guys that might be a little bit better, but last year, if you picked up Robert Tonyan off the waivers, you were okay. And he was not world-shattering awesome. He had a lot of touchdowns. You can find that lightning in a bottle type of guy. And there is some value in the middle rounds if you want to go for maybe reaching a little bit, but I think you can wait pretty late if you don't take one of those top three.
Yeah, like wait for a while and get Hawkinson or even Font.
Well, I'm looking at this. The ADP for the top three: Kelce at 12, Kittle at 26, Waller at 28. After that, Kyle Pitts is going fourth according to Fantasy Pros, and it's almost it's about double the picks. It goes from 26, 28, then to 49, 55, and 62 for Andrews and Hawkinson. And then you go down to the 90s. So after those top six, you still have, you got to think, a 10-team league, there's going to be 10 top tight ends. 4 of those guaranteed are going to be available at pick 90 or later based on these ADPs. Who those are and whether you're going to pick them is a different story. But again, I think these top guys at some point have to come back down to earth. We'll talk more about our busts and our sleepers here in a little bit, but I just think when you look at your Adam Troutman coming up for the Saints and Tyler Higbee's and Noah Fant and all that, you're not drastically far off of what you'll get with a Hawkinson or an Andrews or even a Logan Thomas who's going at number 7. Kyle Pitts, we have no idea yet.
Better than an Ethan Wolf.
Yes. There's good enough talent later that if you don't go early and get Kelce, Kittle, Waller, I don't think it's worth going after Andrews or Hawkinson personally. I like Hawkinson. I think there's a lot of upside this year, but 6th round, early 7th, it's about right. And I think there might be some better value there at that time. All right. So, Joel, do you have anything here? I know we went through kind of round by round the first time with wide receivers.
Not a lot since just tight ends. I think it's everybody, you almost tend to forget about tight ends because you're so laser focused on running backs. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, wide receivers. And then I got to toss in a quarterback. Then all of a sudden you literally forget, like, oh crap, I got to get a TE somehow. And then by that time you're lucky if Hawkinson is still there.
Yeah. The one thing I do want to say, if you go after one of those top 3 guys and you invest the capital in Kelce, Waller, Kittle, absolutely, without question, do not take a second tight end. Don't waste your roster spot. Find someone on the bye week to fill that hole if you have to, but do not take a second. If you're going to wait till the 10th round, grab 2 scratch-off ticket kind of guys, see which one has it. It's tough because tight ends, you usually don't take more than one. But if you said, I'm going to wait late and I'm going to take Tyler Higbee and Irv Smith Jr. with 2 of your last picks, one of them can start, one of them can be your backup. You at least have 2 tickets, 2 chances, some options. You can almost stream it. It's just a tough one if you don't take one of those top 3 to really get someone you're happy with.
Because you never know what's going to happen with tight ends.
You really don't. And with that, I think we're going to go into our busts. So Joel, go ahead and start us off there.
All right. First one, have bust Donald Parham, if I'm saying the name right. Tailbone injuries are not a good way to start the 2021 campaign. And also, number 2 behind Cook. Second one that's a little bit of a surprise, Kyle Pitts. I think he might be a gamble, just like the whole Falcons offense. He might play everywhere, but is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And then, oh, the number 3 is one just a name that at one time inspired a lot more confidence than he does now. But Mercedes Lewis, 36 years old. QB drama before the season even started. Some folks may have him as a tight end number 59 at best. At worst, he's 84. He might be second on the depth chart, but still has to be a hard pass if he pops up on your draft pick selection.
Yeah, for me, let's start with the Bucks. Just avoid their tight end situation altogether. OJ Howard is coming back. Cameron Brate is a great receiving tight end, and Rob Gronkowski is there. They also have Godwin, Evans, Antonio Brown. I would just say this: avoid the Bucks tight end situation. Get something that's a little bit more secure.
Actually, have a Bucks tight end as a sleeper.
Yeah. Well, it's possible one of them is going to come out and be pretty solid, but I just think it's a bad situation overall to trust as your guy. Again, do not go crazy and take Rob Gronkowski and think I'm solid. If you're going to do that, you might want to have a second option. My next one is going to be Robert Tonyan. I really like the player, but the big issue here is he had 52 catches last year. 11 of them were touchdowns. That's a 21% touchdown rate. Aaron Rodgers is fantastic. That offense still has some holes in the passing game. He's going to have opportunity, but I can't imagine he's going to get 11 touchdowns with only 52 catches again, only 586 yards. So he's got real regression potential. I like the player. If you're going to take him late, you'll be okay. But as far as I think at some points last year, he was a top 3 or 4 tight end. I don't think he lives up to that. And my other bust is just frankly Travis Kelce. Not because he's a bad player. He's getting up in age, but frankly, the ADP is just too high. He's going in the first round in a 10 or a 12 team draft in most situations. You're giving up just too much value. And he's going to probably be the number 1 or 2 at the position, but is he going to be enough to carry your team? Whereas if you go and get a Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs as a pass catcher, or your 8 to 10 area running backs, is he really going to be better at that point? And that's the question I really have. I don't think so. So Kelce, again, for me, a bust is someone who does not live up to their drafted position. So if he's going top 10, top 12, and he finishes overall in points in the 25 to 30, 35 range, he's not going to live up to his ADP. That would make him a bust. All right, so sleepers. I know you said you had a buck at sleeper. I'm interested to see where you go with this one.
All right, I'll just do my number 2 pick as my number 1 pick. None other than OJ Howard, as I tend to think he can become a legit target for Brady. Howard can have a nice bounce back after last year's brutal and very abrupt exit because of the ankle injury during the touchdown. Howard has to be a man on a mission this year, considering how his campaign ended last year. And sometimes that could just fill somebody with the resolve to sort of transcend everything. So that's my number 1. Number 2 sleeper, tend to think a name that showed up quite a lot on the waiver wire last year, Mo Alie-Cox. I think I'm saying it right. If not, please correct me. Showed up on the waiver wire a lot last year. If Mo is ready for a starting role, I think that we'll say he is, and he does step up. Someone has to be a target for Wentz, right? So might as well be the TE. Send him the ball, Mo. And of course, final one, sleeper, Darren Fells, where everyone may look at him as merely a handcuff for TJ Hawkinson. His red zone value might surprise us in 2021 and could, in fact, steal some fantasy points away from Hawkinson, because we know we saw that happen just a lot in general last year when you were wondering, why didn't so-and-so have such a good fantasy week? The person who was in the red zone took away the fantasy points. That happened a lot last year and probably is going to happen again a lot this year.
Yeah, for me, again, a sleeper is someone who grotesquely beats their ADP and their positional rank. So I'm going to start with Miami Dolphins tight end Mike Gesicki. He was very good last year, but if Tua comes along the way it looks like he has in the offseason, he has top 5 potential. He really does. Tight ends tend to be safety blankets for younger quarterbacks. Mike Gesicki has great hands. He's coming into his 3rd or 4th year, 2nd round draft pick. He's got a lot of talent. And with Will Fuller taking the top off the defense, you've got Waddle, you've got Devontae Parker on the outside. It's going to take a lot of that press coverage, that safety over the top out of play. He's going to have a linebacker a lot of time. Good opportunity for Mike Gesicki to finish in the top 5. He is right now ADP of 121, tight end 12. So again, someone you can wait very late and have a potential top end tight end. Next is Jared Cook. You had mentioned briefly that he is the starter in San Diego now, or Los Angeles Chargers now. Sorry about that. ADP of
still in our reigns are still the stupid song San Diego Super Chargers.
I'm sorry, LA doesn't even want them, so they should still be the San Diego Chargers, even if they play in LA, just because LA does not want them. But
they cannot move from the different city when you have that song that is literally in everybody's subliminal conscious.
Yeah, it's been driven by Boomer. Anyways, Jared Cook, ADP of 163, tight end 19. He's going to have a high volume. I don't think there's a lot of receiving options there outside of Keenan Allen. Again, Mike Williams tends to get hurt and shrink at times. Who else is there? Honestly, who else is there? Austin Eckler will get a few, but I think Jared Cook can be that safety blanket for Justin Herbert. Herbert did have a fantastic statistical year last year. I think he still has bust potential. I know I might be the only person that still thinks Herbert might bust still, but if Herbert plays anywhere near what he did last year, Jared Cook has some viability. And last but not least is Noah Fant. He's not necessarily a deep sleeper, but he's tight end 11 off the board, ADP of 104. But if Drew Lock is the quarterback, that bodes very well for him because Drew Lock threw to the tight end almost 25% of the time. He'll have a huge volume share. And if he gets the touches in the red zone, he's got, again, just like Gesicki, top 5 potential, someone you're getting very late in your draft. And it's just someone that you could wait and bank on being there later for you. All right, so now we'll go to my do not draft and avoids. I'm going to have a 2 for here, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, just because they're both in a timeshare in New England. I like Jonnu Smith a lot better than Hunter Henry. If you put a gun to my head and said you got to pick one or the other, I'd pick Jonnu Smith, but I just think they're going to cannibalize each other just a little too much. Mark Andrews is one of those I don't want. He's going in the 4th or 5th round in a lot of drafts. He's 55 overall in Fantasy Pros. That's a running team. And part of the reason I like Marquise Brown is he's going at 110 overall. He's going twice as deep into the draft as Mark Andrews. So I think Brown has better value. I think Andrews is just a little too expensive. And number 3 is Kyle Pitts. It's not that I don't like him as a player, but going tight end 4, 49th overall on average just seems a little bit early, a lot of it early, really. And rookie tight ends tend to take a little bit more time to come into their own. Mike Gesicki, his first year was pretty terrible. Kelsey, the same kind of way. You can look at pretty much any tight end that's great now. They had some rough patches off in the beginning. And I just don't want any part of those. If I'm going to draft in that range, I'd rather go Hawkinson between Andrews, Pitts, Hawkinson. And even then, I'm not excited about that. Is anybody you are just that tight end you're out on? No, don't want it.
Nobody's really popping into my mind right now because tight end is just such a position that it's almost, unfortunately for me, whenever I draft it, it's almost an afterthought because I'm so focused on running backs and wide receivers.
Yeah, if it's not a PPR, it's hard to make the case to even go early for Kelsey, Kittle, or Waller. If it's PPR, then you get a little bit more volume because they all get about 100 catches a year. If it's got a tight end bonus, throw everything I said out the window. Tight ends become a bigger priority. But I don't know how many leagues really do a tight end bonus anymore. Just not something I like. But know your league. That is a big part of any draft. Know your league format, know your league setting, know your league scoring. Because I'm in a league that's got point per completion. Quarterbacks are super valuable in that league, even though nobody normally will take them early. If it's a point per completion, 6 points per passing touchdown, all of a sudden that value goes through the roof. And I think 18 of the first 24 picks were quarterbacks in that one or something like that. So know your league. Understand if it's a tight end bonus league, the tight ends have more value. But if you're in a standard or even a anything less than a full point PPR, it's something you can really wait on and come out just fine. So with that, that is our wide receiver and tight end general draft strategy, bust sleepers, drafts avoids, all that stuff. So Joel, we have a final thought from you today.
Yep, I have a just a short one, an amusing one that apparently I believe this is one of the beat reporters that said if Coach Mike Tomlin was asked if James Pierre has shown enough to be the Steelers' third quarterback, Mike Tomlin said, quote, "We're still swirling those nuts," unquote. And that's my final thought.
Mine is going to be about the Jaguars, which is weird because this might be the only time you mention them by name. This time of year, some things are very strange about depth charts you see online. Right now, the starting quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars is up for debate. But if you look at the depth chart on their website, it is not Trevor Lawrence. It is not Gardner Minshew even. It is Gardner Minshew's mullet listed as the number one quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
What is the mullet's ADP?
He right now is going undrafted, so it's a great value. We'll get more into the quarterbacks tomorrow. Maybe we'll talk about the mullet.
So drafting the mullet is definitely a hairy proposition.
Yes, it is. So, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll do our quarterbacks, our running backs. This is a lot of the meat and potatoes of the fantasy teams for the most part. I do know there are some people that believe in zero RB, and I've never had success with that. We'll talk more about strategy, specifically zero RB on Wednesday.
Even
our strategy session. Yeah. So yeah, with that, we are going to call this a day on this one. Again, tomorrow, right around 6:30, we'll be back with quarterbacks.
Can you have a fantasy football strategy to not suck? Is that an applicable, legit strategy?
Honestly, that's what I try and do every year, and sometimes it works a lot better than others, but only time will tell. So yeah, hopefully everybody got some information or a laugh or just, maybe terrible advice from us. And
some affirmation.
Yeah. With that, we go.